I've had to change my basal insulin several times, and the process hasn't always been smooth. I've had periods with way too many highs, way too many low blood sugars, while trying to figure out my basal dose as well as the optimal timing for me. But I've learned some tricks to make this process much easier. So let me take you through my journey so you don't have to make the same mistakes as I did when I switched basal insulin. I've lived with type 1 diabetes since 1997, and I've been using Levemir most of my life for diabetes, but I've also tried Tresiba and now been forced to find a new basal insulin as Levemir has been discontinued in the US. So on January 7th, I started this, the Lantus biosimilar called Basaglar, and this will probably not be the last time I have to make a switch. I've identified 5 things that I think is a blueprint for successfully switching to a new basal insulin. First of all, you need to get to know your new basal insulin. They don't all work the same way. I also found that doing effective basal testing is a key to success. And I have failed fast and aggressively. We definitely need to talk more about that, and we will. You also need to figure out if you need new carb ratios. I'll tell you, of course, also how to do that. And then you need a long-term strategy for your basal insulin, because life changes, our body changes, you might not need the same dose for the rest of your life. As mentioned, not all basal insulin, so also called long-acting insulin, works the same. And it's really important that we understand our new basal insulin. So for me, I switched to Basaglar, and I understood the duration, so how long it stays in the body, but I made the mistake of not also paying attention to when it was peaking, because Basaglar peaks, and so do some of the other long-acting insulins. I pulled this from WebMD, and here you can see some of the most common long-acting insulins. So it's the different types. There's the insulin glargine, which is Basaglar, Lantus, Toujeo. There's insulin detamir, which is Levemir, the one I've been using up until now. And there's insulin degludec, and that is Tresiba. And here you can see the onset, the peak, and the duration for these types of insulin. Onset means when does it start working in the body after injected. Peak means, if it does have a peak, is when it's the most effective in the body. And duration is how long does it stay in the body. But wait, you can see here that it says there's no peak for Basaglar, and I just said that there was. Well, so I also pulled the Basaglar label, and here it does say that Basaglar peaks around 12 hours after injected. Well, I guess even WebMD can make small mistakes. And this is also why it's so important that you have a discussion with your medical team before you make any changes to your care or you start any new medication. I did have a conversation with my diabetes educator, and she actually told me that some people see a peak from Basaglar after 8 to 12 hours. So that's how I became aware of that. And this is the other thing. On paper, the duration of Basaglar as well as Lantus is 24 hours. But we're not robots, and we don't metabolize insulin the same way. And this is what I found. For me, Levemir only lasted about 16 to 18 hours in the body, and Basaglar actually lasts just shy of 24 hours. Levemir, that would peak, so it would work the most effectively after about 6 hours, and I find that Basaglar peaks for me after about 12 hours. Again, these are my findings for my body, but it's something to pay attention to, and a little later on, I'll talk a little bit more about why this is important. So how do I know this? How do I know when insulin peaks in my body and how long it lasts? Well, that takes me to the second mistake, or actually let's call it the second learning I've had from switching basal insulins. That sounds a little less negative. And that learning is to do basal testing really early on. Basal testing simply means testing out if your basal insulin dose is right for you. Appropriate, right? There are basically 2 ways of doing basal testing: using a CGM, so continuous glucose monitor, or using finger sticks only. Basal insulin's job is to take care of our blood sugars outside of meals. That means that if we're not eating, if we're not injecting any rapid-acting insulin, also called mealtime insulin, and if our basal dose is set right for us, our blood sugar should stay stable 24/7 without dropping too low or without creeping up too high. Let me show you an example. So rapid-acting insulin lasts about, on average, 4 hours in the body. So let's say that I get up at 8 a.m., I eat breakfast, and I take rapid-acting insulin. So I take 2 units or whatever. That lasts for about 4 hours. That means at noon, that insulin will be out of the body, and so should the food. I then don't eat until 6 p.m. Just an example. That time is considered fasting. If my blood sugars drop below or start to climb up during that 6 hours, that indicates that my basal insulin is not titrated correctly for me. That fast could also be 24/7, or it could be at other times. Let's say that I'm done eating at 6. That means that my fast would start at 10 p.m. instead. I sleep until 8 a.m. I like to sleep. So that time frame would also be a fast. And this can also be a time frame where we can test if our basal insulin is titrated correctly. Because again, if it drops too low or if it climbs during that fasting period, it indicates that our long-acting insulin, our basal insulin, most likely isn't set right for us. So you can do basal testing by fasting for prolonged periods of time, or you can focus on those periods between meals. That's what I do. So I pay a lot of attention to my blood sugars in the afternoon, where there's a longer stretch between meals, as well as overnight. I rely heavily on my CGM, so my continuous glucose monitor, for basal testing, because it measures my blood sugars 24/7. It sends it to my app. That means, for example, when I wake up in the morning, I just look at the app and I can see how my blood sugars have been behaving overnight. If you do not have a CGM, it's a little harder to know what's going on overnight, but what you can do instead is that you can measure your blood sugars using a finger stick before you go to bed, and then right when you wake up, to assess if it's the right nighttime dose for you. Just be mindful that you want to measure your blood sugars right when you wake up. Don't wait, don't go around, don't have that cup of coffee. Measure your blood sugar right away. Most people will see a rise in blood sugars after they wake up, and that can interfere with your assessment of whether or not your basal insulin is set correctly. But overall, doing a basal testing using finger sticks requires a lot of measurements, and I don't think you can do it in just one day. You'll need to measure your blood sugars over several days. A trick can be to see if your doctor has a CGM sample you can try, or you can try a free version of either the Freestyle Libre or the Dexcom CGM. This is an option in the US. You still need a prescription though. But once you have a prescription from your doctor, you can go download a coupon for a free sensor on the manufacturer website. My third learning is tightly tied to basal testing, and it's one of those mistakes that I've made the most frequently. And that is fail fast and fail aggressively. It sounds kind of wild to be saying that about anything diabetes, but here's the deal. I spent over a month trying to figure out my Basaglar dose, and that was way too many low blood sugars. The reason why it took so long and met so many lows were, one, that per my endo's recommendation, I started out taking the same amount of Basaglar as I had of Levemir. And it turned out that I needed 7 units less of Basaglar. So quite a difference. And second, I titrated that insulin down very slowly. I would reduce my insulin by 1 unit, and then I would wait a few days before making further changes. And because of this, I didn't sleep a lot most of January. In hindsight, looking back, looking at how many low blood sugars I had overnight and how aggressive they were, I should have reduced my Basaglar way more aggressively and much faster. And I think I would have been better off with a few nights of high blood sugars than a whole month of low blood sugars. And not everyone titrates on their own like I do. Imagine if I'd had to wait 3 to 4 months until I saw my endo. Yikes. If you don't manage by yourself like I do, so if you don't titrate on your own, I highly recommend that you come up with an aggressive titration plan with your medical team before you start your new basal insulin. Ultimately, I landed on a total Basaglar dose of 16 units that I take at 9 a.m., whereas I took 21 units of Levemir at 9 a.m. and then 2 units of Levemir at 11 p.m. I took 2 doses of Levemir because in my body, it didn't quite last 24 hours. And I actually preferred that. I preferred the shorter acting, long acting duration of Levemir as it allowed me to adjust my dose overnight on a day-to-day basis. So if I was less active, more active, I could adjust that nighttime dose and reduce the risk of higher low blood sugars. A brief side note on that activity, that can be anything from going on a walk to going for a run, bike ride, going to the gym. That can increase your insulin sensitivity. That means how effective your body is at utilizing the insulin that you inject. So if you're more active, you generally need less insulin to manage your blood sugars. I don't have that flexibility with Basaglar, and quite frankly, it makes my life a little bit more complicated. So every morning I have to assess whether or not I'm going to be more or less active compared to my baseline, and then take the appropriate morning dose to suit my needs. So if I anticipate a day to be more active than usual, I'll often lower my daily dose down to 15 instead of the 16 units of Basaglar that I usually take. But have I already taken the 16 units and then end up having a more active day than normal, what I'll have to do, and this works for me, is to eat a snack before bedtime so that my blood sugars don't drop low overnight. This annoys me though. I hate having to eat when I'm not hungry and I'm just doing it to feed the insulin. I could just stick with 15 as my base, but on days where I'm not as active, I'll see my blood sugars start to creep up between meals as well as overnight. It's pretty wild how much of a difference 1 unit can make. And those were the first 3 things that I had to learn: getting to know my insulin, do basal testing, and aggressively failing fast. And the next thing that I learned is that with Basaglar, I need different carb ratios at different times of day, or said differently, I need different amounts of rapid-acting insulin with my meals. It's not a lot, but it's enough to make a difference. When I was using Levemir, my carb ratio for lunch was 12, now it's 8. What this means is that for lunch, I used to need 1 unit of insulin per 12 grams of carbs. Now I need 1 unit of insulin per 8 grams of carbs. It's a small difference, but let me show you. Let's say that I'm eating 24 grams of carbs for lunch. Before, my carb ratio was 12. That means 1 unit of insulin covered 12 grams of carbs. So I needed 2 units of insulin for 24 grams of carbs. Now, instead of dividing by 12, I divide by 8 because my carb ratio is now 8. So now I need 3 units. So difference of 1 unit for lunch. My breakfast carb ratio is about the same, and I need less insulin in the evening. It makes sense when you start to look at the peak times for Levemir versus Basaglar. And for this to make any sense, I should mention that lunch for me is usually between 2 and 4 p.m. For me, Levemir was at its strongest after 6 hours, so in the early afternoon, and Basaglar doesn't peak until the evening for me. So me needing a bit more mealtime insulin for that midday lunch just makes sense given the peak times. And this is one of the reasons why learning about your insulin, when it peaks and its duration, is so important. Okay, so the last learning that I want to share with you in this video is to have a long-term strategy. Whenever things change, that can be to our activity level, stress level, your work schedule, or just age, we have to change our insulin management strategies to fit the new normal. And again, if you're not self-managed, or even if you are, this is something that you should discuss with your medical team. Come up with strategies. Don't walk around with too many lows or too many high blood sugars for prolonged periods of time. For example, I found that 15 to 16 units works for me. However, then I hurt my shoulder, so no gym, no activity. Then I got sick on top of that. So just being sick in itself can really increase your insulin needs. So now I have me being sick, being inactive. I needed more basal insulin. I needed more Basaglar, so I increased that until my body had healed. And there's nothing wrong with injecting more basal insulin if that is what your body needs. Had I not done that, I would have been fighting high blood sugars using my rapid-acting insulin 24/7. So yeah, Basaglar has been another learning experience for me, and maybe also a reminder of some of those diabetes basics that I know, but I don't necessarily think about on a day-to-day basis. I have a whole YouTube playlist of videos where I go over diabetes basics. And if you like this video, if you found it helpful, you might also like this one, where I go over 6 diabetes habits that I had to unlearn. And while you do that, why not subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications? That way, you'll never miss a thing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.